Welcome to the Asbestos Knowledge Empire.
What does asbestos management mean to you?
I used to really struggle with the asbestos management at my site, but now it's a breeze.
It used to be really expensive. I was paying loads, but now I've got my asbestos power team in place. It's so much easier.
Asbestos can be a pain in the arse if not handled right.
We had to stop the job because asbestos was discovered. Now we don't have that problem.
Asbestos management is easier than you think. Asbestos management. Be proactive, not reactive. Think about asbestos first, not last.
And now your hosts, best-selling authors and asbestos experts, Ian Stone and Neil Munro.
Welcome to the Asbestos Knowledge Empire. My name's Neil Munro.
And I'm Ian Stone. So today we're talking about asbestos spray coatings, and kind of what it is, just a few bits about it, and really kind of some of the problems and issues that you can get when it's being removed.
Yeah. So what is a spray coating? So a spray coating is pretty much, well, it's got a very high asbestos content, probably around there towards the 80%, maybe a bit more, asbestos fibre. Predominantly it was amosite and crystalite that were used within the actual asbestos fibre type. And that was mixed with a Portland cement binder. So it was literally, don't be confused by the word cement, because it was literally just to stick the asbestos fibre together.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it, essentially, it was almost getting on for like 100% asbestos, because
you can clearly see the asbestos fibre.
It's just pure asbestos fibre, isn't it?
It looks prickly, it looks horrible. It's, whenever you see it, as an asbestos surveyor, it's always like, oh,
yeah.
Makes you have a little shudder when you see it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just such a high content, and it's so friable because there was only such a very minor binder of it. Like I say, the content's really high, the friability is really high.
Yeah.
It's one of the worst materials that we get and we come across.
Yeah, very low density, soft material. So we'll release asbestos fibre very easily for minimal disturbance, really, in its raw state.
Where was it put onto?
So predominantly it was used for fire protecting beams and on ceilings, roofs. It was even sprayed onto the asbestos cement sheets as well on factories and warehouses. It was used quite a lot in factories.
Yeah, it was fire protection and acoustic attenuation as well, wasn't it? Because it really did kind of soak up the sound.
Yeah.
So I think that's why it was used in those areas.
Yeah, factory theatres. Yeah, a lot of theatres used, as you said.
Yeah, some swimming pools have had it on their ceilings as well.
Yeah. So yeah, anywhere sort of like where it's given either, like you said, acoustic or sort of fire protection on structural elements.
Yeah, definitely, exactly. That's why it was on beams.
Yes.
That's why it was on some ceilings.
Yeah.
Because of that fire protection. I mean, I've seen it in car parks where the ground floor is like a drive-in area where there's garages.
Yeah.
And all the ceilings and beams are coated with sprayed asbestos because above it are the apartments, the flats, the hotel, whatever it is above.
Protect.
Yeah. So what was the application process?
It was a horrible process.
I mean, that photo, that one photo that kind of everybody's seen, really. There's basically a guy, no mask, standing there. It looks like he's holding like a fireman's hose, but it's a larger bore, isn't it?
Yeah, big sprayer.
And out of the end of it is literally just this muck flinging completely out. And yeah, like I say, he's there. He's got his cap on. He's got a pair of work overalls on, but he's holding this sprayer, and it is literally flying out of the end in a massive fashion.
Yeah, so it was a very messy job, as you can imagine. So the sprayer would be spraying it onto the elements which were supposed to be sprayed. So, the beams, the ceilings, the roofs, or whatever. But that obviously, the spray would not only be going onto those elements, but it would be going on the floor. It'd be going on the walls. It'd be going literally everywhere.
It's kind of, I don't know, if you take a hose pipe and you water your garden, and you just have it on the normal spray setting, it goes absolutely everywhere.
80% goes where you want it. The other 20% goes everywhere else, doesn't it?
Exactly that. And I mean, the way they actually applied it, a lot of the time was they would coat either the beam or the ceiling or whatever they were coating with a bitumen first, so it had something for it to stick onto as well. A lot of the time, so that presents its own inherent problems when it comes to removal. But we'll come on to that.
That was quite common, like for structural beams as well, because there's an element of water within the actual spray coating itself. That would give the steel, the metal, a bit of protection from rusting
the water and rust.
Yeah, until the spray actually dried out and sort of stuck.
So like you say, it goes everywhere. So if you're spraying the ceiling, you can expect it on the walls. You
100%.
you can even expect it on the floor. And I mean, there's sites that we've worked on where so the sprayer would go in one day, or even the same day as the floor guy working.
Yeah.
And while they're installing like the floor screed, where you got bits dropping down or fibres in the air dropping down, and they've then contaminated the floor screed.
Yeah.
Like I say, it literally goes everywhere.
Yeah, like I said, we've seen sites where spray coating, it's not only on the beams, it's in the wall cavities, it's on the floor, it's below the carpets, literally carpets have been fitted on top of spray debris.
Behind other finishes.
Not within the screed, just literally sat on the floor.
Yeah, when it goes onto the walls and areas it's not supposed to go, we call it overspray.
Yeah.
And like you say, when it's on the floor, there's big lumps, it's debris.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you think about the places that it can go to, a lot of the time when it's on concrete, there's expansion joints to kind of stop or give the concrete a little bit of movement.
Yeah.
And before the expansion joints are fitted, well, usually the spray ceiling's been done, or sometimes the expansion joints have been missed. Yeah. And then you've got all sprayed coating and debris that has gone up into these gaps.
Yeah.
And which again, we'll come on to about why that's an issue.
Yeah, with spray coatings, you've got to think about if it's been applied within a building, you've got to expect it to go everywhere.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There's sort of no place that could be sort of untouched. You're talking risers, boxing, even in windows, like below window sills, in window cavities, literally everywhere.
Yeah, it's one of the worst products that has been used.
Yeah.
It's one of the worst products to remove.
Yeah.
It's one of the worst products to manage.
Because essentially it gets into everything.
Yeah, it really does. It's not a great one, is it?
No. If you take, for example, an asbestos insulating board panel, that asbestos product is contained within itself.
Yeah.
And when you affix it to something, the worst case that you're really going to get from that is any sort of debris that has left.
Dust and debris.
Where you've drilled into it or where it's been affixed to the other surface.
Yeah.
With spray coatings, it literally just penetrates every single crevice.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes as well, the concrete that it's sprayed onto, sometimes it's like prefab stuff, which is a little bit better because for the prefab stuff, it's generally smooth concrete.
Yeah, smooth concrete is a sort of cleanable surface as we would deem it.
Yeah. Whereas some of the other stuff, the rough poured concrete that was on site, you're left with just a rough surface. And so with that, again, the spray just goes into it, all over it. It makes it difficult to see.
Yeah, it embeds into the actual surface of the concrete.
All right, the removal process then. How do we go about removing spray? So we've got a ceiling. How would we go about removing that?
That would always have to be done by a licensed contractor.
Yes.
Under fully controlled conditions, so purpose-built enclosure, under negative pressure, and it would be a complete wet removal process.
Yeah.
And the contractor would be using injection suppression methods to remove that, and it would be scraped from the surface initially and then literally bagged up. Basically, what tends to happen is the injection needles are applied a certain time. There's a calculation to calculate out how much water they're going to need to inject into the material to make sure it's completely saturated
yeah.
all the way down to the surface level.
Yeah.
So that once they're removing it, the whole material is being removed wet, and there's no dry, because where with spray coating, it's very easy to exceed a control limit, removing that dry.
Yeah, because of the friability, because of the high content. If you come across a section that is dry, well, the fibre count's just going to go through the roof.
The fibre release on that would be, it's quite high.
But at the same time, what you have to be careful of is not creating an asbestos slurry.
No.
Because then you can go from one extreme to the other. Because when you're using
there
a
is
lot
a fine line, and you really do need an experienced team on this, removal team, that have done spray coatings before, don't you?
You do. Yeah, it's not even just down to the company of, we've done spray before.
The
It's
supervisor
got to be
and
the
the
supervisor
operative.
and the operatives. Definitely, without a doubt. Because if they've never worked on asbestos spray coating, it can go wrong very, very quickly and very, very badly. Even down to the point of the enclosure construction needs to be that much more rigorous.
Robust, and ensuring that, because like we said, the spray coating does go everywhere. I mean, it's getting the enclosure right to make sure it includes all elements, so you can get into all elements to clean it.
Yeah, because if you think about it,
Sheet a wall off, and you're potentially sheeting
sheeting
asbestos,
a whole area
residue,
off.
debris. That's
Yeah, I mean, if it's on a beam and you go up to the wall and you sheet around it where it goes through the wall, well, you still need to clean the element around the beam of where it's going through the wall, where it's penetrating, because that's where it is going to be, definitely.
There's a lot to be thought about asbestos removal processes.
Again, it's like going back to the way it was applied, it goes everywhere. It needs to be thought about like that. It's, yes, all right, you might look at it and go, right, we've got it on this beam, but any experienced person would know that, well, there's going to be overspray, it will be on the walls, it is going to go further afield, so that needs to be kind of attributed and accounted for in the scope and the specification stage.
Definitely.
And also the questions that need asking as well at that point of, well, I know it's going to be in gaps, I know that probably is going to be onto rough concrete.
Yeah.
So they're the conversations that you need to have with the client, because it's not a straightforward, I want this removing, here's your price, we go away and do it.
No, because there's always, there's a lot to consider and a lot to review. What is the actual structure of the building? What is the structure of the surface that the asbestos has been applied to? What's the end goal of the client as well? So what's actually going to be happening within that area post these works? What is the client going to be able to do within that area?
Yeah, what can
following
they
the
achieve?
asbestos removal? And what we mean by that is where you've got a surface that can't be 100% guaranteed to be clean. So as Ian said, the rough surfaces, the pitted concrete, or in inaccessible areas. So sometimes there will be areas within the building that you can't get into clean without demolishing it.
Yeah, there'll be poles where the concrete's not fully formed where it should have, and then there's a hole in that.
Yeah, like quite a common one where you've got a structural metal beam that's sort of holding up the roof. What you will find is sometimes that there will be a gap between that and the outside concrete wall or whatever the outside is.
Yeah.
And sometimes you physically can't get in between that gap to clean it out without actually taking the concrete out on the front.
Yes.
So there will be an area which can't be cleaned, which will need to be sealed.
Yeah.
And that area will be considered as containing asbestos until a further date where it can be cleaned. So those are elements that need to be considered. And what do you do? And there's elements. So if the client can bear, some elements of the concrete not being cleaned.
Yeah. So if they can take it forwards within their refurb or whatever's going to happen.
It might be
with that
just
area.
that we want to get rid of the asbestos and we're just going to put a suspended ceiling in below it. It doesn't really matter. We've removed the risk as far as reasonably practicable, but we can live with never drilling into that concrete. Then that would be a perfect example of encapsulating that, sealing it all. It's completely safe, and you just need to manage it accordingly.
Yeah, and there's a few options there. It can be painted. I mean, the example that you gave about the gap around the edge, that can be battened out or boarded and sealed off again.
Or even foam filled, depending on the size of it.
Yeah, as another option. This is, again, like why clients really need to think about it before, and contractors need to think about it before they get there, because if the client wants it asbestos free as far as it can be, well, the only way to get it off of some of these areas. So if you imagine spray coating that's been applied to bitumen, that's onto concrete, that goes up into all these small areas where you can't physically even get a hand in, well, how are you going to get that out? You're then into demolition works of the building to remove a layer of concrete to get rid of that bitumen and the contamination.
Yeah, and again, we have seen it with whole ceilings as well. So, the asbestos spray coating has been applied onto a rough pitted concrete structural ceiling, and the asbestos is removed down to a rough surface, but we can't guarantee it's 100% clean.
No.
And basically the client can't live with that because they need a new suspended ceiling into it and there's nothing to fix it. So there's options that need to be considered into that.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, you're right, and there are always options around that. So, okay, we need a new aircon system to go in on that ceiling. We need a new suspended ceiling to go in on that system.
Yeah.
They're two common things that happen.
Yeah.
And one of the ways around that is the asbestos removal contractor can fix, under the control conditions, battening and or even the tracking itself to the ceiling.
Yeah, we've seen like contractors fixing a secondary ceiling underneath it, a completely timbered out, completely, boarded out ceiling that's encasing the asbestos residue, so the client never has to sort of go beyond that safe area.
Yeah, it's like double sealed. It's been painted first and then a secondary ceiling encapsulating it even further.
Completely.
Like a mechanical, it stops anybody getting in there.
And we've seen, like you said, battening out, and we've also seen, actually can go in out sections of that rough surface to remove it.
But when you think about that, and that's why all of these points need to be thought about by all the parties right at the beginning, because the cost difference and the cost implication,
it's enormous.
The time from scraping a flat, smooth concrete surface where the sprayed insulation comes off lovely.
Comes off like a dream.
Yeah, it comes off like a dream versus...
Polish it and it's shiny and everything.
Versus like a pitted concrete, got a load of gaps in it. It's just... overspray's gone everywhere.
Yeah.
The time frame and difference and the cost implications at the end of that are huge.
Yeah, the other thing just sprang to mind when you were talking then was quite commonly, even when you've got a smooth concrete surface, generally speaking, it's only in section.
Yes.
And generally you get gaps, don't you?
You still get gaps and you still get pitted areas.
Yeah, so you might get 90% of that one slab clean, but all the gaps around it, generally, they need to be sealed, don't they?
Yes.
So I'm just trying to sort of highlight some of the stuff that you really need to think about on these types of jobs.
Just the issues around it, because, asbestos removal is complicated, it is difficult, but it can be even worse than normal with some of these things.
Yeah, I think we've kind of highlighted this quite a few times on various podcasts, is it all comes down to really at that very initial specification at the front end, agreeing with all parties, making the client aware of even if you don't know, it's raising the flag of...
It's highlighting what ifs.
These are potentially some problems that we're going to get with spray coatings, and they're common.
Yeah.
Generally you will get most of them on every spray job, won't you?
Yeah, there's never been a spray job that's ever gone kind of without those issues, as far as I'm
we're 100%.
aware.
Unless you've got full demolition of the building and you can remove literally every element of the building, is the only real time I think you're probably going to guarantee getting it all out. Because if you're essentially refurbing and you're not, taking structural elements out,
then you're not going to want to go as far as getting it all out.
Exactly that.
Or I say you're not going to. You still might need it, but they're the discussion points that need to happen.
Yeah.
Like you say, it comes down to what does the end goal look like? What's the outcome look like for the client?
Yeah, and sometimes it's cost of removal versus cost of refurb.
Yeah.
And lifetime managing that as well.
Like you said, it's whether they can wear it or not. Does it meet their requirements for their building use for that time?
Yeah.
How long are they planning to actually use that building for?
Yeah.
And kind of versus, well, do we really need to do all that? Because that's what we've got, the pain barrier we've got to go through to get there.
Yeah, that's a very good question, really, because if you think about spray coatings, they were kind of phased out in the late 70s, mid to late 70s.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, if you've still got some spray coating, it's bloody old now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's old and it's deteriorated. And
you're at least looking at about 40 years.
Yeah.
Because although 1985 was a prohibition of anthracoxide light and spraying and insulation of asbestos, it really was phased out sort of late 70s. So you're talking a good 40 years there.
Yeah. I'm old and knackered and I'm 40 next year, so God knows what the asbestos is like, but it's true because it does deteriorate.
Yeah.
But that also just springs to mind then, if it is deteriorating, that will affect your plans as well. Because if you think, right, well, what I want to do with this section is just get it under control, get it managed, so I'm going to encapsulate it. Well, again, that can bring its own problems because your ceiling as it is, you can see it's deteriorating. You can then spray it with encapsulant paint, and by order of doing that, that can bring all of that spray coating down because of the extra weight on it.
Yeah.
Again, that can kind of really scupper what you were originally planning. I mean, imagine employing a contractor to encapsulate a ceiling for you because you're going to make it safe. They do that, they walk away, lovely job, and then a couple of weeks after, well, it falls down. What would that do to your business? It's kind of those thoughts as well need to be employed. So the big key thing is you do need to get people on board that really do know what they're doing with spray coating from the specification stage, the analyst who's on site.
Oh, 100%. We haven't actually mentioned this.
No.
If you're ever going to have air monitoring for the duration of a job, spray coating is the one to have it.
It's the one never to scrimp and save on.
No,
never.
No, because literally one breach in that enclosure, and you could be exceeding the control limit.
Easily.
If the contractor hits a dry patch in the removal process, and there's one little gap in that enclosure, and it hasn't been picked up, you're talking exceeding the control limit.
Yeah, massive exposures can happen and can occur from that.
Yeah.
I mean, we're a great advocate of having air monitoring on every project anyway.
Yeah.
Because of, it's just that reassurance. Yeah, I mean, it's great that you can have the plans of works, the risk assessments all in place.
Yeah.
But when somebody asks you that question, I saw asbestos removal works happening last week.
Yeah, on the Wednesday.
How do I know I've not been exposed?
Yeah, and you produced the certificate of reoccupation for the Friday.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I reckon I was exposed on the Wednesday.
Yeah, prove that I wasn't.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Proving that they weren't exposed, well, you can't really do that unless you've got that proof. Because, yes, you can give them a plan of work that says it's all done safely, it's done in an enclosure. Yes, you've got the certificate of reoccupation at the end of the job saying, yeah everything's all fine and dandy now.
Yeah.
But prove that I wasn't exposed because I feel there was a breach in that enclosure.
Yeah.
When I walked past,
there was a little hole.
There was a hole in it, or whatever, and that's the thing. You haven't got that categoric proof, and that's why having an analyst on site while those works are going on 24/7, it's invaluable when you ever get asked that by a question.
Yeah, that's just a scratch of the surface of why you would have one, but essentially that's the only evidence that you've got.
Yeah.
To say no, because we've had air monitoring for the duration of these works, and we never had an elevated count.
Yeah, definitely no. I mean, because of that reason, even more so, it's needed on any spray job. Yeah. It really, really is. I've got to say, you'd be a fool to do a spray job without having
100%
air monitoring 24/7. You really would be. It's just not worth it because the amount of, again, like I said earlier, the amount of spray jobs that have happened that I'm aware of where there have been breaches in the enclosure and works have to stop. Yeah. And the contractors stop work. Everybody comes out. The whole area's cleaned down, all the rest of it.
Yeah. And if you didn't have that...
Yeah, it'd be ridiculous. No one would know. People would be getting exposed. Little Johnny and his mum walking through the shopping centre would be breathing in God knows how many asbestos fibres. Yeah,
it doesn't bear thinking of.
It doesn't bear thinking of, no. I think that pretty much covers kind of the issues surrounding it. And, I mean, you can hear the way we talk about it. It is like one of the worst that we can work upon, one of the worst.
The hardest.
It is. It really is hard. And we can't labour that enough. So I hope we've got that across without labouring the point too much. Thanks for listening. Remember, asbestos first, not last.